Chapter 1. The Dream of Flight in Survival. For as long as humans have gazed at the sky, they've dreamed of flying. Myths of winged gods and soaring heroes appear in nearly every ancient culture, but hidden inside those dreams was an equal and opposite fear: falling. To fly was to tempt death. And so, long before powered flight was even imaginable, people began wondering, if we do fall, could something slow the descent? One of the earliest known references to parachute-like devices comes from 11th century China, where acrobats were said to have leapt from towers using wide-brimmed conical hats and primitive fabric canopies. But the most famous early vision came centuries later from a mind far ahead of his time, Leonardo da Vinci. In 1485, Leonardo sketched an invention he called a tent of linen, a pyramid-shaped canopy held open by wooden poles. His note beside the drawing reads, "If a man have a tent made of linen, he will be able to throw himself down from any great height without injury." It would be another 300 years before anyone would prove him right. The Renaissance was full of dreamers, but the idea of jumping from great heights terrified most. Wooden gliders and wings strapped to the arms killed more volunteers than they saved. People were willing to risk everything to go up, but few were brave enough to test what could bring them safely back down. Yet the idea persisted, quietly waiting for someone daring enough, or mad enough, to take the leap. Chapter 2. The First Daredevils. By the 17th and 18th centuries, Europe was buzzing with scientific experimentation. Hot air balloons had opened the sky to human travel, and the age-old fear of falling was suddenly a very real problem. In 1617, a Croatian inventor named Fausto Verancio designed and even claimed to have tested a device he called the Homo Volans, the flying man. According to later accounts, he jumped from a tower in Venice using a rigid wooden frame covered with cloth, floating safely to the ground. The truth of this story is debated, but the idea it planted was very real. Throughout the 1700s, as ballooning captured Europe's imagination, inventors quietly began crafting safety parachutes, meant to rescue balloonists if their envelopes caught fire or tore apart. Most were little more than giant umbrellas, heavy and unstable, but they showed one crucial thing. People were starting to believe parachutes might work. Still, no one had actually dared to use one. The designs looked promising on paper, but leaping into thin air from hundreds of feet above the ground was something else entirely. It would take a man with nerves of steel and a flair for spectacle to make the world believe. Chapter 3. André-Jacques Garnerin, the father of the parachute. In the late 1790s, Paris was a city electrified by change. The French Revolution had torn apart the old world, and the air was thick with both danger and possibility. In this atmosphere, a young balloonist named André-Jacques Garnerin decided to attempt something no human had ever done before. Garnerin was already known for his daring ascents in hydrogen balloons, but he had a new idea: a frameless parachute, made of silk and shaped like an umbrella without ribs, suspended beneath a basket. It would collapse slightly as it fell, slowing descent by creating drag. On October 22, 1797, Garnerin rose 3,200 feet above the Parc Monceau in Paris in a hydrogen balloon. His silk parachute folded beneath him. Thousands gathered below, staring up at the tiny figure climbing into the clouds. Then, to gasps from the crowd, he cut the rope. The parachute opened violently, and Garnerin plummeted. The canopy oscillated wildly, swinging him back and forth like a rag doll as he dropped. Spectators screamed, but then the swinging slowed, the fall steadied, and Garnerin landed hard, shaken but alive. Paris erupted in cheers. Garnerin had done it, the first man in history to make a parachute jump and survive. The French government awarded him a medal. Newspapers across Europe carried the story, and within months, Garnerin was performing parachute demonstrations in London, Rome, and beyond. He proved that parachutes worked, and in doing so, changed humanity's relationship with the sky forever. Chapter 4. The 19th Century Daredevils. After Garnerin's breathtaking leap, parachuting became less about survival and more about spectacle. What had begun as a safety device quickly transformed into public entertainment, drawing crowds eager to see human beings defy death. Garnerin's own protege, Jean-Geneviève Labrosse,
made history in 1799 as the first woman to make a parachute descent. She would later marry Garnerin and carry on his daredevil legacy. Making multiple jumps across Europe, audiences were captivated. The sight of a lone figure drifting from the heavens was mesmerizing, almost dreamlike. By the 1830s and 1840s, parachuting shows became a staple of traveling fairs. Balloonists would ascend thousands of feet into the air, detach their parachutes, and descend before roaring crowds. But these early jumps were brutal and risky. Parachutes had no vent at the top, causing them to swing and spin violently during descent. Many performers broke bones. Some were killed. One notorious daredevil, Robert Cocking, attempted to improve parachute design by creating a rigid, cone-shaped model to eliminate swinging. In 1837, he ascended 5,000 feet over Greenwich, England, and released himself from a balloon. His parachute collapsed instantly, and he plunged to his death in front of hundreds of horrified spectators. His death was a sobering moment, but it didn't stop the march of progress. Later, inventors learned from his failure, adding the now standard apex vent to stabilize canopies. This small hole at the top allowed air to escape, preventing dangerous oscillation. By the late 1800s, parachutes had become lighter, more stable, and far safer. Balloonists were using collapsible canopies that could be packed and deployed in midair, a crucial step toward modern parachuting. Still, parachutes were seen mostly as stunts, not serious tools. Military commanders and engineers regarded them as novelties. That would change with the dawn of powered flight in the first great war of the modern age. Chapter 5: War and Necessity. When airplanes appeared in the early 20th century, they were fragile, unreliable, and often deadly. Early pilots flew without seatbelts, without oxygen, and crucially, without parachutes. It wasn't because parachutes didn't exist. It was because military leaders believed they would make pilots cowards. If given the chance to bail out, they feared, pilots would abandon their planes at the first sign of trouble. The result was tragic. Countless aviators perished when their engines failed, wings snapped, or aircraft caught fire, deaths that could have been prevented. Ironically, it was balloon observers, not pilots, who first used parachutes in war. During World War I, these observers floated high above the front lines in massive hydrogen-filled balloons to spot enemy movements. They were sitting targets for enemy aircraft. To survive, they wore German-designed static line parachutes that deployed automatically when they jumped. These worked so well that by 1917, Germany began issuing parachutes to its fighter pilots. The Allies resisted longer, but by the war's end, the effectiveness was undeniable. Parachutes saved hundreds of lives and proved they were not just toys, but essential equipment. Yet this was only the beginning. The next war would show just how powerful parachutes could be, not just for saving lives, but for launching attacks.
Chapter 6: World War II and Beyond. By the outbreak of World War II, the parachute was no longer an experimental novelty. It had become a weapon. Militaries around the world saw its potential, not just to save pilots, but to deliver soldiers straight into enemy territory. The age of the paratrooper had begun. In 1940, the German Wehrmacht stunned the world by using airborne troops to seize key positions during their invasions of Denmark, Norway, and the Netherlands. Dropping silently from the skies, these elite Fallschirmjäger units bypassed front lines and captured bridges, airfields, and fortresses before defenders even knew they were coming. Their most dramatic moment came in May 1941, during the Battle of Crete, when more than 13,000 German paratroopers descended from the sky in the first major airborne invasion in history. They took the island, though at a terrible cost, with thousands killed. But they had proven what parachutes could do. The Allies quickly followed. Britain created the Parachute Regiment. The United States formed the 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions, and the Soviet Union built massive airborne forces. By D-Day, June 6, 1944, thousands of American and British paratroopers were dropping behind enemy lines in Normandy under the cover of darkness, sowing chaos before the beach landings began. Parachutes had evolved into precision tools of warfare. They were engineered to deploy reliably, steer through the air, and carry heavy loads of men, weapons, and supplies. What had begun as silk umbrellas for showmen were now military instruments that could change the course of battles. And as the war ended, another transformation began, from weapons of war to tools of freedom. Chapter 7. From survival to sport. With the world at peace. After 1945, thousands of surplus parachutes and trained jumpers were left behind. Some of these veterans, adrenaline still pumping, weren't ready to stop falling through the sky. They began jumping for fun. This gave birth to sport parachuting in the late 1940s and 1950s. Civilian clubs sprang up across Europe and the United States, and competitive parachuting soon became an organized sport. Jumpsuits, helmets, and steerable rectangular ram air canopies replaced the old round military designs, allowing skydivers to glide and land with pinpoint accuracy. By the 1960s and 70s, parachuting had splintered into new forms: free-fall skydiving, formation jumping, base jumping, and later wingsuit flying, each pushing the limits of what the human body can do in the air. The parachute had gone from an invention born of fear to a symbol of freedom. Closing words. The story of the parachute is the story of humanity's courage and our fear. It began as a desperate idea, a last hope for anyone who dared to fly. From Da Vinci's sketchbooks to Garnerin's trembling leap, from soldiers tumbling out of burning planes to thrill-seekers leaping from mountain cliffs, the parachute has saved lives, shaped wars, and let us dance on the edge of the impossible. It embodies our most human contradiction, the terror of falling, and the unstoppable urge to jump anyway. 4 centuries ago, people wondered if it was possible to survive a fall from the sky. Today, thousands do it every single day, just for fun.